So there are a few different types of metabolism found in the microbial world. We have many fewer types of metabolism when we talk about bigger things like plants and animals, but there's a wide diversity of styles of metabolism among microbes. So there's a couple things, we can classify these different styles of metabolism by where an organism gets its energy and where an organism gets its carbon. And then you can mix and match those things to get different styles of metabolism. So some organisms, like us, get energy and carbon from the same molecules. So, for example, we eat carbon-rich food like sugar and fat, and we break those molecules down, the sugars and fats down, to harvest both the energy packed into those molecules and also the carbon building blocks from them to build new cell parts and drive cellular processes. So we've been talking a lot about energy recently and how energy is transferred back and forth between kinetic and potential. But the other piece of metabolism inevitably involves materials, building materials. I mean, you're not built out of nothing, empty space, right? There's these physical building blocks down at the atomic level that you put together to build your whole body. And so those building blocks have to come from somewhere. Now, we get our energy and our building blocks in the same processes, from the same molecules, organic molecules like sugars and fat. But some organisms get their energy and carbon from different sources, so they're not as linked up, right? So some organisms, like plants, get their energy from things like sunlight. Sunlight has no carbon, so carbon has to be acquired separately in a different process from the energy acquiring pathways. So plants take carbon in from carbon dioxide in the air. So they have these tiny little microscopic pores in their leaves called stomata that gas exchange happens through. So carbon dioxide comes in and the plant uses the energy from the sun. The plant harnesses the energy from the sun, converts it into ATP in a process called photosynthesis, and then it uses that ATP to take these low energy molecules, carbon dioxide, and rearrange them into high energy unstable molecules packed full of energy like sugars. Right? So the carbon comes from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, and the energy comes from the sun. So there are other places still that organisms can get energy or carbon. So if you're thinking about the energy source, the most common energy sources are light or molecules. So light, when an organism gets its energy from light, we call that organism a phototroph. So plants, algae, cyanobacteria that photosynthesize, they are all phototrophs. And then organisms that get their energy from molecules, we call chemotrophs. You are a chemotroph. You get your energy from sugars and fats. So you are a chemotroph. And a lot of microbes are chemotrophs as well. So light, the energy in light, so would it be kinetic or potential? It's actually kinetic. So you may have heard at some point in your life that light is the fastest thing in the universe. There's these tiny little particles called photons, and they're the fastest nothing travels faster than the speed of light. That's the fastest thing. So the energy in a photons are incredibly tiny. They're much tinier than an atom. But when they slam into something, usually they're so tiny that they go through the empty spaces of things. But when they slam into a molecule, they're going to cause a change in that molecule most of the time because they pack a punch due to their speed. And then molecules, as we've already talked about, these molecules pack energy in the form of a battery. It's not in their movements that they carry energy most of the time. It's in their unstable bonds, their unstable electron structures. So they're packed full of energy like a battery. We call that potential energy. It's in there, but you can't see it. You can't see it in movement. It's just packed inside, waiting to be used. So light is kinetic energy, molecules are a type of potential energy. All right, and then onto the carbon side of things. So where are the different places an organism can get its carbon? Well, we've talked about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So organisms that get their carbon dioxide from the atmosphere are called autotrophs. Auto means self. So this means self-eating. Trophic levels refer to eating. Or self-food, because autotrophs don't need to eat other living things to get their carbon. They make organic molecules out of thin air, literally out of thin air, right? So they're self-sufficient. They don't live off of other living things. They make their own sugars and fats out of nothing, basically. Well, not out of nothing, but out of air. So the other main carbon source out there is organic molecules. Now, organic molecules are things like, carbon-based molecules like sugars, fats, nucleic acids, proteins. These are all carbon-based molecules, and so they're called organic molecules because they have these carbon backbones. Organic molecules are almost exclusively made by living organisms. They do form spontaneously sometimes, but not usually, because what the molecules that just live on a non-living planet, the molecules that you find there are usually very low energy molecules, because to put together a high energy molecule requires an energy investment. And yes, like if lightning hits or a photon hits, or there's a lot of heat, you can get that energy from an external like this random energy source to put together a high energy molecule, to energy to pack into a high energy molecule. But it doesn't usually happen spontaneously. It usually requires the direction of a living thing, because living things have the ability to harness energy from the environment and direct it towards the production of high energy molecules. Okay? So organic molecules almost always, almost exclusively, come from other living things. And so we call organisms that get their energy from their carbon from organic molecules, we call them heterotrophs. Hetero means other. So heterotrophs have to eat other living things. Now, sometimes they eat decaying material from a once living thing, but they rely on the fact that there are living things around to produce these organic molecules. So you are a heterotroph, a plant is an autotroph. A plant is getting carbon dioxide using carbon dioxide for carbon. You are getting your carbon from other living things, plants and animals. Okay, so you're a heterotroph. So if we can mix and match these, right? So and let's look at the next slide actually to talk about that. So a photoautotroph is an organism that gets its energy from the sun and its carbon from carbon dioxide. So plants are photoautotrophs. So all I'm doing is mixing and matching these terms from this slide. So where does it get its carbon? Carbon dioxide, autotroph. Where does it get its energy? From light, from photons, phototroph. So photoautotrophs are things like plants, algae, cyanobacteria, energy from the sun, carbon from the atmosphere. Chemo Autotrophs. These get their energy from inorganic chemicals. So this is going to be things like high energy, non-carbon based molecules that are just found in the environment, like ammonia or hydrogen sulfides, things like that. So those are high energy inorganic molecules, and you usually find them in unusual places like hydrothermal vents deep in the under the ocean, things like that. So chemo autotrophs are getting their chemo because, look, they're getting their energy from molecules, not necessarily organic molecules, just molecules. Right? So they get their energy from molecules, and these chemo autotrophs also get their carbon from carbon dioxide. So everything here is from non-living sources. The very first life on the planet would have to be something like this, right, where they don't rely on any organic compounds. So chemo autotrophs, they're usually things like archaea. There are some bacteria, but usually things like archaea, and you find them around hydrothermal vents where there's a lot of high energy inorganic chemicals spewed out from these vents from deep in the under the Earth's surface. Photoheterotrophs, they get their energy from the sun, like a photoautotroph, but the difference is they're heterotrophs, so they get their carbon from eating other organisms, from organic compounds made by other organisms. This is a very strange category, because if you're going to eat an organic compound for carbon, you might as well extract the energy from it too. So it's sort of a weird combination of things. So they're not able to get the energy from the organic compounds, they get their energy from the sun. And there's only a few examples. You can look up photoheterotrophs on Wikipedia and you'll find things like purple sulfur bacteria that tend to live on the walls of rocks by waterfalls and stuff like that. And they're just it's a strange group, but there are a few organisms that do this, so we have to have a category for them. And then chemo heterotroph, that's what you are. These are organisms that get their energy from organic compounds like sugars and fats, and their carbon from organic compounds like sugars and fats. Right? So we are chemo heterotrophs. Now, microbes cover the gambit of metabolic categories, and it's good to know that all these categories exist. But pathogens and parasites invade your body. Also, mutualists infect we call it an infection, even though it's not a negative infection. When you have a microbe that gives you things that's good for you and they're colonizing your body, we still call it infection sometimes. So what do you think they are? What category do you think they are? Well, if they're inside your body, are they going to be using sunlight? No, because not a lot of sun makes it into your body. So they're going to not be phototrophs, they're going to be chemotrophs. They're going to be, which means that they're getting their energy from inorganic or organic chemicals. So they're getting their energy from molecules that are found inside your body. Now, if they're in your body, it's not because they want carbon dioxide, because there's an abundance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere outside your body. It's usually because they really are there to extract calories from you or from the food that you eat. So your microbes, good or bad, are going to be chemoheterotrophs. They are eating you. Now, when they eat you or eat the food that you eat, you're giving something to them. Now, if this exchange goes only one way, you call them a parasite or a pathogen. But if they give something back to you in exchange, and especially if they pay for what they take from you plentifully, like if they're worth their cost to you, then they would move past the category, move into the category of mutualist, because remember, it's a spectrum. Mutualists and parasites exist along a spectrum with with anything, it's a continuous spectrum. So you can have very mutualistic organisms, you can have semi-mutualistic organisms, you can have microbes that move back and forth along that spectrum. You have commensals exactly in the middle. And so all the microbes living in your body are chemoheterotrophs. They are eating you. The question is, are they paying for what they take? And are they paying enough? Not just are they paying for what they take, but are they paying enough for what they take? Because if they give something back to you that isn't useful for you, they would still count as a parasite. All right, so carbohydrate catabolism. So we're just focusing on chemoheterotrophs. I've told you about these other categories, right? But we really only care about the chemoheterotrophs in this class, because even though this is microbiology, we really have a focus on human health here. So we're just going to focus on the microbes that invade your body, good or bad, and they're all chemoheterotrophs. So within chemoheterotrophs break down organic molecules for carbon and energy, and there's a few different ways to do that. Okay, so within chemoheterotroph, we have respiration and fermentation. And there's two different kinds of respiration or fermentation. These are different processes by which organic molecules are broken down for energy and carbon. And then within respiration, we can have aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. And I'm gonna reiterate this several times, because for some reason, students just always have the misconception that anaerobic respiration is the same as fermentation. And it is totally, totally different. Anaerobic respiration is almost exactly the same as aerobic respiration. They are nearly exactly the same. They have very, very minor differences between them. The only difference is atmospheric oxygen is used for aerobic respiration. There's not a gazillion, but there's a lot of different kinds of anaerobic respiration, but each one uses something other than oxygen, something to replace it. It's usually an oxygen-containing salt, but they function exactly the same way. They just have this minor difference of whether it's oxygen or an oxygen-containing salt. If it's atmospheric oxygen, it's aerobic. If it's anything else, it's anaerobic, right? But all the steps are exactly the same. Fermentation is a completely different process, okay? And we'll go through all of these. We're going to go through aerobic respiration first, and then we'll talk about the others. The reason students get these confused is because anaerobic respiration is anaerobic, meaning it doesn't require atmospheric oxygen. Fermentation is also anaerobic, meaning it also doesn't require atmospheric oxygen. But there are huge differences. Fermentation gives only a tiny fraction of the energy return as either kind of respiration. And they don't have the same steps at all. So glucose is the favorite source of energy for all of these processes. Both respiration and fermentation start with glycolysis, and that's as far as they're similar, and then they diverge from there. So both of them use glycolysis as the first step, and then they diverge.